Okay. Can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, that's perfect. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. So yeah, I'm a researcher at the German Aerospace Center, the DLR, close to Munich. I studied geomatics, which is not very known. It's in Faculty of Science, and it actually led me to work on satellite-based positioning. So GPS, Galileo, I mean, I think you all heard about this. And I work mainly now with aerospace engineers. So today my talk is about sexism at work, but most specifically in STEM, so science, technique, engineering, and mathematical, because these are the fields I've been working on and I've been studying, so I would not pretend that I know what happens in other fields. As an introduction, I would like to present you this drawing. It's from a very famous French author. She's called Emma, and she actually did this very famous comic about the mental load. She also did other comics about sexism because she happens to be in IT. And so she also experienced a lot of sexism in STEM. In this drawing that you can see here, a man is talking to a woman, and he says, oh, it would be nice to have a feminine vibe in the office. It will improve communication. We're a bit useless at it. And the woman is just like, oh, okay, like, well then. And my question to you is this a sexist situation? As you can see here, what the man says actually is sounds more like a compliment, right? He says that because she joins, actually it will improve communication and gives a nice vibe to the office, feminine vibe. So why would that be a sexist situation? Why would I start my talk on sexism in STEM about this? Well, this is what I would like to go through with you in this talk. To actually manage to explain to you why comments that seems inoffensive or compliments might sometimes be at the basis of sexism. First, before starting, I've got a disclaimer. I've grown up as a cisgender white woman with no disabilities. For those who are not familiar with the term cisgender, that means that I was identified as a woman when I was born, and I still identify as such. And so my point of view in the society is positioned based on this. Also, I'm a European citizen, and my talk will be about my experience of sexism in Western Europe. And as I just said before, also with STEM, because I don't know how it happens in all the other field, but I hope that we can exchange afterwards, actually, and I can learn a little bit more about your own experience on sexism. So I've got three main parts in my talk. First, sexism, definition of it, and then I will use this great campaign from the Council of Europe that says sexism, see it, name it, stop it, as a reference, and so we can go through, try to see what sexism is, name it, and stop it. We will then talk about unconscious biases, define them, but also then see what are the different types of biases that are experienced by women at work. And then my last topic is microaggressions. There are actually a lot of effects of microaggression on mental health. This is why this topic is actually important and why we tackle it today in this Mental Health Awareness Week. And I would like to guide you through also some potential recommendation on how to deal with microaggression as a victim, but also as a potential offender, because we will discuss it. We are all potential offenders to other people. So, sexism. I took two definitions of sexism. Not that I don't know how to choose or like I'm having problems with that. It's just, I think they bring two different aspects that are both important. The first one is from the Council of Europe, and it says that sexism is any expression, so act, word, image, gesture, based on the idea that some person, and most of the time women, are inferior because of their sex. What I think is very important in this definition of sexism is the fact that it can be anything. It's everywhere. It's around us at all time. We're going to come back to that. But sexism is just, unfortunately, all around us. The second definition comes from the European Institute for Gender Equality. And it defines sexism as Sexism is linked to beliefs around the fundamental nature of women and men and the roles that they should play in society. I put this part in bold because this is the important part from that definition to me. This is the idea that we are born with predefined characteristics and roles as women and as men that make us completely different and that make women unable to perform or solve any mathematical equation and men unable to care for babies. These are, of course, things that are untrue, but these are stereotypes, unfortunately, that leads to sexism. So the definition continues saying that those sexist assumptions I just mentioned can rank one gender as superior to another. And such a hierarchical thinking can be conscious and hostile, but it can also be unconscious. And by there, I introduced my second topic, the unconscious biases. And so sexism can touch everyone, but again, like the first definition, this one specifies that women are particularly affected. From them, I just want to also spend a little bit of time on systemic sexism, which is actually when sexism becomes part of the normal assumptions and operation of a culture, which is happening in our culture. So I hate to break it up to you if you were not aware, but we're living in a sexist culture. It's also a racist culture. We're going to see it later. And this is systemic sexism. Systemic sexism harms women in every aspect of their life, but also at work. So here I put some statistics and numbers to you about how sexism may harm women at work. For instance, women will work way more in unpaid housework, which harms them at work because they cannot work on their paid work. Why they do that? They also are not taken as seriously as men. They endure verbal abuse, and some studies in the UK shows that 2/3 of the young women from 16 to 18 experience or still witness the use of sexist language at school. So it's not going away; it's still there. And you might have heard those terms, the mansplaining, man-interrupting. These are things that happen at work a lot. Mansplaining is those people that explain you, most of the time men, with a very condescending tone, like things that are very basic. While man-interrupting is this habits and this thing that we observe that women are way more often interrupted than men in meetings, both by men and by women, by the way. Systemic sexism harms men too. Not only women are victims of it, men are too. Indeed, society has strong expectation on what traditional masculinity should be about. For example, men should have this desire to win. They should be completely in emotional control. Men don't cry, everybody knows that. They should not be afraid of taking risks. They should embrace violence, dominance, and power over women. They should put primacy on their work, not on their family, and have a strong disdain for homosexuality. These, of course, are not what men are like, but these are the injunctions toward a traditional masculinity. And studies have shown that men who strongly conform to these injunctions are not only more likely to have mental health issues, but they're also less likely to go and seek for a treatment for those mental health issues. And in a study in 2014 in the UK, unfortunately, like they showed that 76% of suicide were committed by men, which actually comes in part from these kinds of tragic sexist effects. So this is the campaign I was talking to you about, Sexist Naming Stop It, from the Council of Europe. Let's go through the first step, see it. Sexism is everywhere. Sexism is in advertisement. I put here like very old advertisement, very offensive. I think nobody can tell me this isn't sexist. So the place of the women should be below the shoes of men or at the sock level. And all they are interested in is to clean the house. Lovely. But they are also very modern advertisements that are extremely sexist. I work in an association advocating against sexist advertisement. We receive them every day. It never stops. And maybe it takes different form, and it might be sometimes more subtle, as you can see there with injunction to get the perfect summer body, with actually a kind of valorization of dominance and violence of a woman, or like just like basic angry mama sexist advertisement that Yeah. They're also in the TV shows. Everybody knows Ross from Friends, very sexist person. But also, if you can see here in the Germany Next Top model, very use of sexualization of women there. They're in the movie. Everybody knows the old James Bond, unfortunately, and also in some school books, in many school books actually, where men are promised that they're going to be pilots, that they're going to be, I don't know, football players, and women are promised to be cheerleaders and stewardess. So sexism is in many different medias. It's also in our families. It's also with our friends at work. And unfortunately, it affects us all, men, women, and children, as we grew up in a sexist culture, and it shapes our point of views. So let's see some different form of sexism. Here I'm using again this comics from Emma because I think it's really well done. The first very obvious form of sexism is hostile sexism. These are old-fashioned sexist attitudes. So here a man is saying to this woman, "Oh, sorry, no, we are looking for a man, otherwise there is too much drama." And the woman actually completely rightfully says it's illegal. This kind of attitudes now in most countries in Europe are illegal. And so if you write this in an email, you're going to get fired. This is a good thing because it drastically diminished the number of hostile sexism in the workplace. However, I still hear and receive testimonies from women that says that this happens, maybe no more in meetings, but at the coffee breaks or at the lunch break. So hostile sexism is decreasing, but it's still there. Anyway, this is a very easy to spot sexism. Let's see now the other type of sexism, harder to spot. It's actually the one from my introduction. It is called benevolent sexism. It's a subtle form of sexism that often comes across as well-meaning, like it looks like a compliment, like this guy saying, "Oh, yeah, you'll improve communication, you bring a feminine vibe in the office, that sounds super sweet." So to explain to you how benevolent sexism works, I will take the story of Emma, the one that she mentioned in her comics. So she's working in IT, and she got this new position in an IT company where she's supposed to supervise projects and make sure that the developers deliver in time what is due for the project. And after 1 year in this position, she gets her first review. And her boss says that they are very happy to have her here because she's so positive, she's so nice, and that her presence really brightens the space. And then she comes back home and she's feeling weird. Like, it was very positive review, right? It's just compliments. Like, she didn't receive anything negative. But she has like her level of self-esteem is like 0, as she writes in the comics. She's like, this is weird. Like, she doesn't have a good impression from it. So what she does is that she talks to people around her, starting by her partner. So coming home, she explains she has this review, and she showed the review to the partner, and the partner, which is external to the situation, is like, "What brightens up the place? What does that mean? Are you a plant or something?" And then she's like, "Yeah, that's my point. Like, it's all about the attitude, but it's nothing about my work. It's like what I'm doing is worthless." And this is what benevolent sexism is about. Women will be praised and receive compliments for playing in the traditional roles of women. So for being there and caring and like doing what is expected from them. And as she realizes that, she's like, okay, let's change my attitude. Let's be more assertive and see what comes out. So instead of going to the developers and be like, "Hey, please don't forget the correction this evening because yesterday you left early, so we couldn't send him in time. So please, thank you. She gets a little bit more assertive and she's like, "Hey, we still need those corrections. I'll let you finish them and then send them, please." And that's all. But after a few months already, she gets a new review from her boss that says that everybody found that she became arrogant and she's demoted. So the story of Emma introduced benevolent sexism, but also what it's called ambivalent sexism. Ambivalent sexism is the idea that there is a stick and a carrot. If you behave in the roles that are traditionally associated with women, you get praised, but you are praised for very undervalued tasks. And if you decide to take on and do bigger tasks or like get more assertive, which is not expecting from you as a woman, then you get like a harsh response to it. This is the idea of the ambivalent sexism. So I wanted to come with some personal example of sexism that I had at university, at my work, but also stories that were shared to me shared with me from colleagues, but also from students and from women I've met, because I've been talking a lot about those topics recently, and so I hear a lot of stories. And I hope that this example of sexism might allow you maybe to realize you have been yourself victim of sexism, or you know people who are victim of sexism, and you might be able to help them. The first example is a situation I experienced and other women also experienced. It was during my hiring process. In one company, I arrived and was quite stressed. One of my future male colleague, saw me there stressed, and he was like, "Oh, don't you worry, you're a woman, so you're gonna get a job anyway." And I was just like, oh my God. I don't know where it was coming from. Maybe he was really trying to comfort me and he didn't mean any harm. Maybe he was a little bit jealous because in the STEM field, women were not present for decades. They couldn't study STEM. So this is a new concurrence that they are facing. And maybe this is also linked to jealousy. Anyway, the effect on me is that I started my new job knowing that my colleagues were seeing me as inferior, that they were seeing me as getting this job because I was a woman, not because I studied and worked hard before to get it. So maybe this may never realize what he did, but to me, it was already like setting the level actually in the tone in which I was going into. The evaluation based on look. I had that several times at university. I guess many women experience that. You go out of an oral exam and you got like super good grade, and your male colleagues are like, "Yeah, that's because you're wearing a dress." And no, I spent also like the last week studying. Does that count? But it was always diminishing and demeaning to me to actually. So these are obviously like an obvious form of sexism, I guess. Some that are a little bit less obvious are examples that some colleagues of mine reported also based on look. So they were at the summer school, and at the end of the summer school, there was this big project, and they needed to present it, and they were the only women in their group, each of them. And so all the male in the group were just like, you're going to present, because if you present, you know, like you look nicer, and then we're going to get better grades or so. It's great. Like, I mean, all the men in the group say that you look nice, like a nice compliment, but at the same time, it's also quite degrading. Like, you work just as hard as anybody else on this project, and the only thing that is remembered from you is that you're a woman, you look nice, so you go and you make the presentation. And it's impossible to take it so great, actually, even if it's meant as a compliment or something. And so sexism is not always meant to harm, but I think once you know how to identify it and you know how to name it, then it's really hard not to get very hurt by all these kinds of comments. We will go back to this later with microaggressions. Last example, maybe, I've never been pregnant, but I heard many stories going in that direction. These are the stories of women that come back from pregnancy and that see that their big projects or their big client are not coming back to them. So because colleagues justify it by saying that they don't want to burden those women with those big clients or those big projects. Even though like those women came back to work, like they are ready to work. This is what you call come back to work. And so also this is a kind of sexism. It's just like retention of opportunities to women, and like actually lowering their opportunities in their careers by not offering them what they are allowed to, because when they left, they were promised to have those big clients, big projects afterwards. So this is another form of sexism. Maybe we talk about this later if anybody wants to share any stories. In the meantime, let's talk a little bit about the effects of sexism. So we saw it with the story of Emma, right? The feeling of worthlessness. the undermining the sense of belonging, the lower salaries and opportunities, for sure, like Emma was demoted in her story. Also, the victims might develop higher anxiety levels, and they might even develop depression based on sexism that they keep receiving at work. And if sexism gets too big, it can sometimes degenerate into violence or harassment. So almost 3 women out of 4 experience sexism at work, and those who've experienced sexism are more likely to leave their jobs. So if there are any managers listening to this talk, I think this is an excellent reason to stop sexism. First, the mental health, of course, of your employees, but also, retention of women. So how to stop sexism? I took here some advice from the Council of Europe. The first step is educate your people about sexism, educate people about how to recognize it and how to name it. Second, is calling out the sexist attitude. Third, putting in place support services, because when one of your employees is victim of sexism, they end up most of the time alone, and they actually would need support to get out of the situation and to be able to talk to offenders, maybe. So put clear support system in place that are really easy to access. Put also clear reporting lines in case of sexism. Who can you contact? Should you go to HR? Should you go to your hierarchy? Should you go to the Works Council? This should be clearly stated somewhere so that people have no doubts in case they are victim of such sexism. Last point, take disciplinary sanctions. If you always are kind to the offenders, nobody will ever care about the problem, actually. So if there are no disciplinary sanctions following case of sexism, sexism will always remain in your company. So it's been 20 minutes. It's perfect. I suggest that we switch now to the second topic, which is unconscious biases. What are unconscious biases? Well, your brain keeps receiving information. You smell things, you hear things, you see things, you taste things. You receive so many information. And the way for your brain to treat this information is to create mental shortcuts, also called stereotypes. What are those stereotypes? Well, easy. Women are good caretakers. Men are good at fixing things. African Americans are poor. Your brain is creating lots of shortcuts, and just based on a few situations. So unconscious bias are defined as a prejudice in favor or against one thing, person or group, compared with another, usually in a way that is considered unfair. Do you have unconscious bias? Do I have unconscious bias? Of course. I mean, everybody, there is no way of going out of unconscious bias. As we said before, our society is sexist, it's racist, also homophobic, not a good society we live in. But so we are building a lot of stereotypes that are very unfair towards discriminated people. How to know what are our unconscious bias? Because they are unconscious, right? It's really tricky. Fortunately, Harvard University created amazing tests. It's called the implicit association test. I put them on the right side. Like I just took a screenshot of some of the available tests. You can see the different topics. So skin tone, weight, sexuality, transgender, religion, race. So when you take this test, you will have to associate some words and some picture with concepts, good or bad. And you do that very quickly. And so you can evaluate whether you favor something over something else. For instance, the results of those tests show that 76% of participants associate men with career and women with family, with participants being both men and women. Sexism touches everyone. Same, 75% of participants show a preference to white people over Black people, and this with 50% of the participants being Black people. So these tests are really interesting, and I really encourage you to spend some time doing some of them just to evaluate where you're located on the scale of bias. What are the type of biases that women experience at work? There are 6 main biases. This comes from the website Lean In. Maybe you've heard about this. So the first bias is the likability bias. And we actually just talked about this in the story of Emma. When women are agreeable, they are seen as incompetent. And when they actually are assertive, they are less liked by people. So for women, it's always a choice between being assertive and not being liked, or being too nice but not being taken seriously. The performance bias. We tend to overestimate men's performance and underestimate women's performance. So men will be hired based on their future potential, while women are hired based on their past accomplishment. And many studies now have proven that if you replace a female's name by a male's name on a resume, you get 60% more likely to be hired. So this is the performance bias. A third bias is maternal bias. So there is this false idea that when women are having children, they are less committed to their work, or they are even like less competent with respect to men. And so it turns out that mothers that are coming back from maternity leave are more penalized on small errors. But this bias don't only affect mothers, it also affects the fathers who are taking family leaves. They also suffer from that bias and are more likely to get less good reviews, and also less likely to have a promotion. The fourth bias is the attribution bias. Women are more likely to be blamed for their mistakes and less likely to be credited for success. And this has a big impact on the confidence of women over time. Women will always predict that they will perform more than they actually do, and women will apply for jobs if they only match 100% of the criteria, whereas men would apply for the jobs if they match 60% of the criteria. The fifth bias is the affinity bias. I think everybody can recognize themselves into this. We tend to spend more time with people that are like us, and we tend to avoid or even sometimes dislike the people that don't look like us or are not like us. So this bias has a specifically strong effect on women and on people of color. You can imagine how we might alter the hiring process if your process is based mainly on personal appreciation instead of fixed criteria. Finally, I would like to talk about intersection. This is a very important notion that will be used also for the microaggressions we're going to come to. So if you're a woman, but in addition, you're Black and you have disabilities and you're immigrant and maybe you're a lesbian, you accumulate lots of identity that will lead to bias to other people. And instead of just receiving sex bias, you will receive also racist bias, LGBTQIA plus bias, and you will accumulate this, and it will lead in more microaggression for you every day and make your working environment very hard to survive, actually. So we just introduced the microaggressions. Let's go to it. Again, two definitions, but because I think they also bring two different important aspects. Microaggressions, these are comments that demean or dismiss someone based on their gender, race, or other aspects of their identity. I took also a definition from NUTUT, which is a French association fighting for sexist and sexual violences. And the beginning was exactly the same, so I didn't put it, but the end was interesting because they also introduced this notion that microaggressions might lead to the creation of hostile, degrading, humiliating, intimidating, and even offending environment for the victims, which seems to me also very important in the workplace, because if you keep receiving microaggressions coming from different colleagues around you, of course, your environment is also something that is going to be threatening to you. So it's not only the acts and isolated thing, it's also the environment it creates. Imagine you're just in a bench in Munich and you have like a Black person sitting next to you. Well, a microaggression would be to be like, oh, no, come on, where are you really from? You're not from Munich, right? Or like, it would be like, oh, your German is so good. These are microaggressions, of course, towards people of colors. To a lesbian woman, but you're a lesbian because you haven't found the right man yet. Or to a woman, just being like, so When are the babies for? So these are all small microaggressions, but that leads to a macro impact. So we're going to talk about this in a second. Why do they lead to micro impact? Is because microaggressions, even if they are not intentional and not meant to harm the people in front of you, are very repetitive. They happen so frequently for discriminated people. And for these people, also the victims of microaggression, it might be sometimes very hard to identify what they hear as violence, as it is really hard also for offenders sometimes to realize that they are doing microaggressions. So here are a few examples of what microaggressions at work are. So Black women are nearly 2 times 5 more likely than white women to hear someone at work express surprise about their language skills or other abilities. Lesbian and bisexual women and women with disabilities also are far more likely than other women to hear demeaning remarks about themselves or other like them. In France, I'm not French, I'm from Belgium, but I follow a lot the actuality in France. 25% of the working population has reported having been victim of aggressions, and 86% among them declared having been through additional hostile attitudes such as discrimination and work evaluations. And here we come back to this environment that can get very hostile actually if you are victims of microaggressions. What are the consequences of microaggressions? Well, they're actually very damageable. The impact of microaggressions is immediate and is long-term. We talk about this here in the Mental Health Awareness Week because it impacts mental health, it impacts emotional health, and it may impact physical health with chronic diseases and depression. Victims are very often feeling very helpless and don't know how to react to those. It leads also to a loss of self-confidence for them. So I would like to state here that the sexist jokes are, of course, a problem and part of those microaggressions, because in our society, there is discrimination and there are injustices based on gender. The same goes for jokes based on racism, fat phobia, or ableism, etc. So what can you do when you are a victim of microaggressions? I've got no good solution, but I just gathered some ideas of strategies on how to react. First, if you answer your aggressor right away, your offender right away, they might feel hurt and attack further. And this is even more harmful. Like they can be like, oh, but you're so sensitive, or oh, it was a joke, don't you have any humor? And this might be like even harsher to get a second aggression right away. An option is not to answer. You might not have the energy, you might not have the time, and you might not have the patience to answer your offenders all the time, and that's completely okay. But the problem is that when nobody call out those microaggressions, they will repeat in time. So what you could do is give a detailed explanation. Well, I would do that if it's someone I care, I would say, because then I will try to spend time and explain why this is a microaggression, and hoping that they could be able to have self-reflection. But the problem is that you have no guarantee that you're going to get a result out of it. So you might spend a lot of time and energy on this. Other strategy, maybe just to mention that what you just heard made you feel uncomfortable. Try to use humor if you have any good inspiration. Also return the question to your offender, just in the hope that they will realize how inappropriate that was. You can also verbalize stereotypes that were hidden in this comments, or just make the aggression very explicit, like what you just said was very transphobic. You can ask the offender to repeat, and I have to say this last solution is the one I use the most often. So even several times, like if there is a group of people and one offender, asking them to repeat what you just say, because maybe by repeating it, they will just understand that this was an aggression and feel maybe ashamed about it, or understand by themselves. Anyway, there are many strategies. There is not a good one. Nothing works like nobody is just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like really, this happens. So I would say the most important is to choose whatever makes you feel good when this happens, whatever comforts you the most in this very uncomfortable situation. And at work, be aware that you can always contact your colleagues that you trust, the human resources, maybe your hierarchy if you trust them, diversity management, works council, or occupational medicine. And always keep writing form of everything. It's always very helpful. Strategies as a potential offender. I'm a potential offender. You are potential offenders. I am white. I'm cisgender. I might be like super transphobic. I might be very racist. I have no disabilities. Why do I know? So I might be offending a lot of people. So to avoid offending people and trying to be as safe as possible, I've got a few tips. The first one is thinking. Ask yourself a few questions. Is what you're about to say based on a stereotype? Second, could your statement hurt the person you're talking to? Third, has this person maybe heard already 1,000 times what you're just about to say? Or is this person going to appreciate what you're about to say? Once you thought about this, listen. If someone comes to you and say that you offended them, don't react by getting angry or be just like, oh, it was just humor. You cannot deny someone's feeling. Those people that offended, and you have to listen to that, and you have to question yourself about these aggressions that you committed. Because if you don't do that, those people that just called you out might not dare call somebody else in the future, because it's another aggression towards them. We discussed it before. So the last two steps are self-reflecting and learning. Please, if someone comes to you and say that you aggress them, just be humble, just listen to what they have to say and then try to learn. There are so many resources available on sexism, unconscious biases, and microaggression. Educate yourself. Try to be a better person and to improve the world you are living in and your working environment and your relationship with your colleagues, but also with your friends, with your family. The last point, as a general rule, if you're about to say something that relies on stereotypes, whether they are sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, fatphobic, the wisest choice will always be to shut up, and you will avoid committing any aggression. Finally, I would like to talk about being in the light. It's great not to offend people, but you can also help them, those people that are victims from microaggressions. Because sometimes when you're a victim of microaggression and nobody's reacting around, and you see, so you're in a group, one person offends you and nobody seems to care. This might be just as hurtful as the aggression itself. So what you can do as an ally is speak up, to let the offender know that something that they say seems very uncomfortable to you. You cannot speak instead of the victim. The victim is the one that should be able to speak. But you can say that something is wrong and make the offender know that you disagree with what they just said, and the victims know that they are supported. You can also try to repeat or reformulate what the offender just said, so that maybe they realize that this is not something that is okay to say. And finally, if you think that your offender is open to self-reflection, you can talk to them in private and try to explain to them why their behavior is problematic. What I would advise also is, if you're a victim of microaggression and you don't know how to react, or even if you reacted, go and see the victim afterwards. Tell them that you felt uncomfortable and listen to their feelings. Get them the opportunity to feel heard. This is already like the end of my talk. I think I'm right in time. I wanted to conclude with this quote from Tarana Borg. She initiated and led the Me Too movement. Yeah, I think this quote actually matched pretty well this talk. Get up, stand up, speak up, and do something about it. Don't let sexism, unconscious bias, and microaggressions ruin the workplace, ruin your family, ruin your friendships. Be a better person, learn from it, and yeah, do something about it. So I am Cécile Deprez. you can add me on LinkedIn. You can always contact me if you want to discuss those topics. If you feel you have been victim of sexism and you need someone to talk to about, I'm always open. We can arrange a meeting. So yeah, please take my contact, write me an email or contact me on LinkedIn. And I would like to thank Moyu and Cora and also Barbara for inviting me here today. Thank you very much for the opportunity.